December 1944, the Ardennes forest, encased in ice, in the freezing air, thick with condensation and despair, the Wehrmacht's shock troops lay hidden. It was Hitler's final, desperate gamble, a move meant to turn the tide of the war. But right now, during a brief lull in the fighting, the war smelled not of gunpowder, but of food. Captain Klaus von Steiner, a career soldier whose face seemed carved from the same gray stone as the ruins of German cities, stood over a collection of captured American supplies. His gaze swept past the rifles and helmets. He was mesmerized, staring at something else, at something that seemed like a joke, a Hollywood movie set, an absurd dream. Lying in the snow before him were neat cardboard boxes and olive-drab tin cans, K-rations, C-rations. He read the labels as if they were a manuscript in a forgotten language. Meat and beans, ham, eggs, and potatoes. Nearby were packets of Nescafe instant coffee, Hershey's chocolate bars, packs of Lucky Strike cigarettes, small can openers, packets of sugar, salt, and even a few sheets of toilet paper. Steiner swallowed hard. In his field pack lay the standard German ration for the Western Front late in the war, a piece of ersatz bread baked with sawdust to make it feel denser, a small pat of margarine, and a compressed brick of pea soup. His soldiers hadn't seen real meat or real coffee in months. Propaganda, a young lieutenant next to him whispered, echoing what they were all thinking. They planted this here on purpose. It's probably poisoned, but there was no conviction in the lieutenant's eyes, only a hungry, desperate gleam. Unable to resist, one of the soldiers used his bayonet to pry open a can labeled pork and beans. The can opened with a soft hiss, and a rich, warm, heavenly aroma drifted through the frosty air, the smell of real, rich pork stew in a tomato sauce. It was the smell of another world, a world where they didn't skimp on soldiers' food, a world with an industry so powerful it could afford to pack chocolate and cigarettes into an individual soldier's rations. The silence was deafening. In that moment, in that snow-covered forest, the war was lost for Captain Steiner and his men, not on the maps of the general staff, but right here, a defeat felt in the gut, a simple human desire for a piece of real meat. They weren't just fighting another army, they were fighting a civilization of abundance, one that saw a soldier not as mere cannon fodder, but as a citizen whose comfort was considered by thousands of people far away on the home front. Steiner slowly picked up a chocolate bar from the ground. He broke it in two and held out half to the lieutenant. "Try this, Hans," he said quietly. "Taste our defeat. Here is the English translation of your script, adapted for a voiceover. The language is crafted to sound natural and clear for a native English-speaking audience while preserving the original meaning." In 1939, when the Wehrmacht's boots first stepped onto Polish soil, the German soldier was among the best fed in the world. The Prussian military tradition, always attentive to detail, had created a well-designed, high-calorie food system. It was based on a daily ration from the field kitchen and an emergency iron ration kept in a bread bag. In those early, victorious years, the soldier's mess tin was full. In the morning, he received strong, real coffee and fresh bread. In the afternoon or evening, there was a thick meat stew known as Eintopf, a large portion of potatoes with meat and a piece of sausage, cheese, or a few eggs served with his bread. The iron ration consisted of a can of preserved meat and hardtack biscuits. This was the food of conquerors, simple, hearty, and high quality. But even the most well-oiled machine breaks down when a war stops being a swift campaign and becomes a drawn-out, bloody slaughter. And so the German soldiers' mess tin began to slowly but surely empty. This degradation happened in several key areas. Quality, the era of ersatz. Total war demanded total economy. As the Reich's resources were thrown into the furnace of a two-front war, they began to run out, and this immediately impacted food quality. It was the beginning of the ersatz era, the age of substitutes designed to replace real food. Ersatz coffee. Real coffee became a luxury, available only to officers behind the lines. The soldier on the front received a drink made from roasted acorns, chicory, or barley, which only vaguely resembled coffee in color but not in taste or its invigorating effect. Ersatz bread. To increase volume, bakers began mixing flour with anything that could add bulk. Potato flour, bran, and toward the end of the war, even sifted sawdust. The bread became doughy, heavy, and tasteless. Ersatz sausage. The meat in sausages and canned goods was increasingly replaced with soy protein, starch, and the lowest quality byproducts. The famous German sausages, or Wurst, turned into a tasteless gray mass. Quantity, cutting rations. The farther the Wehrmacht advanced into the east, the longer and more vulnerable its supply lines became. Partisans, the seasonal mud, and a lack of transport all meant that field kitchens often went without provisions. The official rations on paper were rarely met. Soldiers could go for days without hot food, surviving on their meager iron rations. The Eastern Front was especially harsh. During the winter of 41, entire divisions starved, surviving on frozen horse meat and whatever they could confiscate from the local population. The dream of a blitzkrieg melted away along with the last of the food supplies. Variety, the monotony of survival. Even when food was available, it was bleak and monotonous. For weeks, even months, a soldier might eat the same thing: rutabaga soup, frozen potatoes, and ersatz bread. This took a toll not just on the stomach, but on the psyche. Food was no longer even a small pleasure. It became a grim, tasteless routine, fuel to be consumed just to stay alive. By 1944, the German soldier's mess tin had become a symbol of the Third Reich's decline. It held a watery slop that smelled of desperation and defeat. And when American abundance burst into this world of austerity and survival, the contrast was so monstrous that it broke the will to fight more effectively than any tank division. America entered World War II with a firm conviction, inherited from the Civil War. An army marches on its stomach. But in the 20th century, that was no longer enough. The army had to be not just fed, but satisfied. The idea of a communal pot where everyone eats the same, often tasteless slop was incompatible with American individualism. A soldier, whether he was a farmer from Iowa or a clerk from New York, was accustomed to a certain level of comfort, and the army was expected to provide it, even in the hell of the front lines. This led to the revolutionary concept of the individual combat ration, which culminated in the famous C rations and K rations. This wasn't just food, it was the American dream, packed in tin and cardboard. Saw the C ration, a standard of reliability. The C ration was the workhorse of American supply, designed for situations when a field kitchen was unavailable. It consisted of 6 small tin cans, which made up a soldier's daily allowance. 3 M units for meat. These were the main meals. Initially, there were 3 varieties: meat and beans, meat and vegetable stew, and meat and vegetable hash. Later, other options were added, like the famous ham, eggs, and potatoes. They were high in calories, filling, and by frontline standards, incredibly tasty. 3 B units for bread. This was the side dish to the main meals. The set included hard but edible biscuits, several packets of instant coffee, sugar, and candy or chocolate. The entire day's ration weighed about 7.5 pounds and provided a soldier with roughly 3,300 calories. Most importantly, it was completely self-contained. A soldier could eat it cold, straight from the can, or heat it over a fire. He was his own chef and restaurateur. The K ration, elegance for the airborne. If the C ration was a reliable pickup truck, the K ration was an elegant, compact sports car. Developed by physiologist Ansel Keys, hence the K, specifically for paratroopers and mobile units. It was the pinnacle of ergonomics and packaging design of its time. The daily ration consisted of 3 separate, wax-coated, waterproof cardboard boxes: breakfast, dinner, and supper. The contents of each box were thought out to the smallest detail. Breakfast: a small can of chopped ham and eggs, biscuits, a packet of instant coffee, a fruit bar, and 3 sugar cubes. Dinner: a can of cheese, biscuits, caramels, and a packet of lemonade powder. Supper: a can of meat pate, biscuits, a D-ration chocolate bar, a special army chocolate designed not to melt in the heat, and a bouillon cube. And in each of the 3 boxes, like a cherry on top, was a small bonus that symbolized the entire philosophy of the ration: a pack of 4 cigarettes, chewing gum, a few matches, and a can opener key. This wasn't just food, it was a system that told the soldier, "We've taken care of you. We've thought not only about the calories, but also about your small pleasure after a fight." Contained within that tin can and cardboard box was the full might of American industry, logistics, and psychology. And it was this power, not just the Sherman tanks, that inspired shock and awe in the enemy. The envy German officers felt toward the American ration was a deep and complex emotion. It wasn't just the envy of the hungry for the well-fed. It was a culture shock, a collapse of their worldview, and the realization that they were fighting not just a wealthier country, but an entirely different civilization whose values and capabilities were beyond their comprehension. This envy was built on 3 main elements, each one a blow to the pride and morale of the German soldier. The right to luxury, chocolate and cigarettes. By the end of the war, the small joys of life had all but vanished for the Wehrmacht soldier. Real tobacco was incredibly scarce. Soldiers smoked hand-rolled cigarettes made from crude tobacco or substitutes, and the 6 factory-made cigarettes, sometimes issued, were a real treasure. Chocolate had become a myth from pre-war life, something available only to high command behind the lines. Even the special Pervitin lace tanker chocolate, given to tank crews and pilots for energy at the start of the war, had become a rarity by 1944. Against this backdrop, German soldiers discovered that every American GI had a pack of Chesterfields or Camels in his pocket and a full Hershey's chocolate bar in his pack. This wasn't a bonus for bravery or a reward. It was part of the daily routine issue. America wasn't just feeding its soldiers, it was giving them the right to a small pleasure, the right to smoke a cigarette or eat a piece of candy after a battle. This demonstrated such an unimaginable level of abundance that it undermined the very idea of the ascetic, hardened Aryan warrior. It meant that a simple farm boy from Oklahoma was living better in a trench than a German officer. It was humiliating. Attention to detail: coffee, gum, and toilet paper. The second blow to German pride came from the attention to detail. The American ration was designed not only for caloric intake, but also for basic comfort. Instant coffee. While the German soldier drank a murky brew made from acorns, the American could simply add hot water to a packet of Nescafe and have a cup of almost real aromatic coffee. Chewing gum. Every K-ration box contained a stick of Wrigley's gum. It was completely useless from a survival standpoint, but invaluable for relieving stress and maintaining oral hygiene. Toilet paper. This was perhaps the most shocking element: a few modest sheets of paper in a soldier's ration pack. In conditions where German soldiers used newspapers, leaflets, or leaves for the same purpose, this small roll looked like a symbol of an outrageous, almost mocking level of civilization. These small things spoke volumes. They showed that somewhere in the U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps, people were thinking about more than just proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. They were thinking about how to make a soldier's life at the front even a fraction more comfortable. for the German war machine, which viewed the soldier as a resource, a function. Such an approach was unthinkable. As freedom of choice. What's for dinner? The German soldier ate whatever the field kitchen delivered. Today it was rutabaga soup. Tomorrow, rutabaga soup. And the day after, most likely, rutabaga soup again. Thanks to the C and K ration systems, the American soldier had a choice. It was a small choice, but it was there. Today, meat and beans. Tomorrow, ham and eggs. He could trade cans with a comrade. He wasn't just a passive consumer of slop from a common pot. He was an active participant in his own meal. This illusion of choice, this small freedom in the midst of the total unfreedom of war, was the final nail in the coffin of German envy. America was demonstrating that even in a trench, it remained a country of individualists. In the end, the chocolate, cigarettes, and toilet paper in the American ration weren't just products. They were symbols. Symbols of power, wealth, care, and ultimately, superiority. Not so much military, but civilizational. And that was a superiority that could not be defeated. The envy a German officer felt while looking at a can of American stew wasn't about the stew itself. It was envy for the system that could deliver that can across a raging ocean, through the bombed-out ports of France, over roads turned to mud by rain, and place it in the hands of an ordinary soldier in a cold trench in the Ardennes. The Second World War was not just a war of engines, but a war of logistics. And in that war, America was the absolute unreachable champion. Germany was fighting a war of attrition, trying to squeeze the last resources from its economy and occupied territories. America, on the other hand, waged war like a massive business project, where the front line was the end consumer and the full power of an industrial nation worked to meet its demand. A bridge of ships. Across the Atlantic, it all began in the shipyards of Henry Kaiser, a genius of mass production. His factories churned out Liberty-class transport ships at an unbelievable rate, one ship in a matter of weeks, sometimes even days. These simple, unattractive, but spacious vessels created a continuous bridge across the Atlantic. Day and night, risking torpedoes from German submarines, they carried everything needed for the war to Europe: tanks, planes, ammunition, and millions upon millions of those very same cans of rations. Ciao, the Red Ball Express, the highway to victory. When the Allies landed in Normandy, they faced a new problem. The ports were destroyed and the railways were blown up. How could they get supplies to the advancing armies? This led to one of the most ambitious logistical operations in history, the Red Ball Express. It was a massive one-way highway system created specifically for military trucks. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, thousands upon thousands of trucks marked with red balls moved along it without stopping. They carried fuel, ammunition, and of course, food to the front. The drivers of these trucks were predominantly African American soldiers whose titanic, round-the-clock labor enabled the armies of Patton and Bradley to advance rapidly into the heart of France. Coca-Cola for everyone. The symbol of this incredible logistical might became Coca-Cola. Early in the war, the head of the company, Robert Woodruff, gave an order: see to it that every man in uniform gets a bottle of Coca-Cola for 5 cents, wherever he is and whatever it costs the company. This wasn't just patriotism, it was a brilliant marketing move. Following the army, mobile Coca-Cola bottling plants were sent to Europe, Africa, and the Pacific Theater. They were set up right behind the front lines, and the sight of an American soldier drinking an ice-cold Coke in the ruins of a European city had a more powerful effect on the Germans and the Allies than any propaganda. It was a clear demonstration that America could afford to deliver not just the essentials to the front, but also simple pleasures. If they can bring Coke here, that enemy reasoned, what else can they bring? This Coca-Cola front was a second invisible front line, and on this front, Germany lost Long before American tanks entered Berlin, it faced an opponent that had turned supply from a problem into a weapon, making its soldier the best fed, most satisfied, and consequently, one of the most motivated in the world. What a soldier carries in his mess kit or pack reveals more than just its calorie count. It is a mirror reflecting a state's attitude toward its most important military asset, the person with the rifle. In World War II, the American and German approaches to this were polar opposites. The soldier as a resource, the German model. At the core of German military thought, rooted in Prussian discipline and the theory of total war, was a guiding principle. The soldier is a valuable, but primarily functional, resource of the state. Like steel for a tank or powder for a shell, his main task is to carry out orders effectively. His personal needs and comfort are secondary to the ultimate goal, the victory of the Reich. This entire philosophy grew from this system. See asceticism as a virtue. German propaganda cultivated the image of the ideal soldier, hardy, unpretentious, and able to endure hardship stoically. Complaints about poor food or lack of comfort were seen as a sign of weakness, unworthy of an Aryan warrior. A strict hierarchy, access to perks like real coffee, quality tobacco, or good alcohol was strictly regulated by rank. What was normal for an officer was a luxury for an enlisted man. This emphasized the class-based, hierarchical structure of the army. Maximum resource efficiency. The food system was designed to maintain a soldier's physical ability at minimal cost. The main thing was calories. Taste, variety, and psychological comfort were all considered excesses, an unnecessary waste of resources. In this system, the soldier was an object, a cog in the machine. He was fed so he could fight. He was treated so he could return to the ranks. His life belonged not to him, but to the state, and as its resources dwindled, this state demanded more and more sacrifices from him, while giving less and less in return. The soldier as a consumer, the American model. The American philosophy was completely different. It grew out of a democratic capitalist society where every citizen is also a consumer, a customer whose needs matter. When he joined the army, he remained one. The state didn't just use him, it entered into a contract with him. You risk your life for the country, and the country takes care of you. Morale as a weapon. The American command understood that a soldier's morale was directly linked to his living conditions. A well-fed, satisfied soldier who can smoke a cigarette and eat a chocolate bar after a battle fights better than one who is hungry and angry. Comfort was not seen as a luxury, but as an investment in combat effectiveness. Egalitarianism. Although a hierarchy certainly existed in the U.S. Army, the gap in food quality between an officer and an enlisted man was minimal. Everyone ate from the same industrial pot. The individual ration was universal for everyone, from a general to a private. Industry in service of comfort. The American economy, untouched by bombing and destruction, operated at full capacity to provide the army with everything it needed and more. If millions of bottles of Coca-Cola could be produced and delivered to the front, then it had to be done, because it would boost morale. In this model, the soldier was a subject, a client of the army. His needs were not ignored, but were studied and met. He wasn't just given fuel for survival, he was provided a service. And in the trenches of the Ardennes, these two philosophies met face to face. The German resource soldier, exhausted and hungry, saw the American consumer soldier, well-fed and supplied. And in that moment, he realized that his state could not or would not give him even a fraction of what the enemy state considered the norm for its people. It was a devastating blow to motivation, one that no amount of ideological indoctrination could overcome. In any war, beyond the official front lines and the rear, a third, invisible territory always emerges: the black market. It is a spontaneous, dangerous, and utterly cynical space where basic human needs outweigh ideology, orders, and even the instinct for self-preservation. On the Western Front in 1944 and 45, the primary, most desired, and hardest currency of this market became American cigarettes, chocolate, and coffee. For the German soldier, exhausted by an ersatz diet, the American ration was not just food. It was a portal to another, well-fed and comfortable world. And to touch that world, even for a moment, many were willing to take risks. Night raids for happiness. The simplest and most common form of frontline commerce was night shopping. In quiet sectors of the front, where active combat had paused, soldiers from both sides would crawl out into no man's land under the cover of darkness. It was a deadly game. One could run into a patrol, hit a mine, or be shot by an overly nervous sentry. But the temptation was too great. A German soldier might offer the few valuables he had in exchange: a captured parabellum pistol, an officer's dagger, an iron cross, or simply information about the location of his machine gun nests. The American, in turn, would lay out his goods: a carton of Camel cigarettes, a few cans of ham, a chocolate bar. The exchange happened quickly, in hushed tones, after which both sides would crawl back to their trenches, one with weapons, the other with delicacies. Trading with civilians. A huge black market flourished in the liberated cities and villages of France, Belgium, and Holland. For the civilian population who had starved during the years of occupation, American soldiers were like gods who had descended from heaven with crates of stew and cigarettes. An American GI could trade a single can of meat for a bottle of good wine or a night with a local beauty. A carton of cigarettes was worth a fortune. A pack of Lucky Strikes became a universal pass that opened any door. This spontaneous bartering corrupted not only the German army, but also the moral fabric of the liberated territories, where survival often proved more important than patriotism. The cigarette as the measure of value. It was the cigarette that became the unofficial equivalent of all value on the frontline black market. Everything was measured by it. Information. For a few packs of cigarettes, a German defector might draw a detailed map of minefields, weapons. A Walther pistol could be worth 2 cartons of Chesterfields. Life. There were cases where American patrols, having captured several German soldiers, would release them in exchange for a promise to bring even more prisoners the next night, all for a few crates of cigarettes. In this perverse economic system, a bullet meant to kill an enemy was sometimes valued far less than a pack of cigarettes that could offer a few minutes of peace and forgetfulness. It was the ultimate expression of the absurdity and tragedy of war. This black market was a symptom of deep decay. It showed that for many soldiers on both sides of the front, the war was no longer an ideological struggle. It had become a matter of personal survival and satisfying basic needs. And in that struggle, American industry, producing millions of packs of cigarettes, proved more powerful than any of Goebbels' propaganda. Against the backdrop of American feasting and German starvation, the Soviet food system stood apart. Its philosophy was as simple as a bayonet and as effective as a PPSH submachine gun. It was not based on comfort or asceticism, but on a harsh, ruthless pragmatism. The main goal was not to please or humiliate the soldier. The main goal was to give him enough energy to survive in human conditions and kill the enemy. Everything else was a luxury. Energy, not taste. The Red Army's food supply standards, approved in September 1941, were among the most calorie-dense in the world, and remarkably, remained almost unchanged throughout the war. The daily ration for a frontline soldier was required to be at least 3,450 calories. Pilots and submariners received even more, up to 4,712 calories. The composition of this ration was aimed at maximum energy density. Bread, the foundation of everything, 800 to 900 grams of rye bread per day, serving as the main source of carbohydrates and calories. Grains and vegetables, 170 grams of cereal grains and about half a kilogram of potatoes, as well as cabbage, carrots, and onions. Protein, 150 grams of meat and 100 grams of fish per day. This was simple, coarse, but very filling food. Borscht, shchi, goulash, and buckwheat kasha with meat were the staples of the Soviet field kitchen. Unlike the American Army, where the individual ration was king, the Red Army's foundation was hot food from a communal pot, which they tried to deliver to the front lines at least once, and ideally twice a day. The Commissars, 100 grams, and Lend-Lease. The Soviet system also had two unique elements that others did not. The first was the famous Commissars 100 grams, a daily portion of vodka for frontline soldiers. This was not just a way to relieve stress or warm up. In the conditions of brutal combat, it was a powerful psychological tool that removed the fear before an attack and dulled pain. The second was Lend-Lease. Starting in 1942, when their own food supplies from occupied territories were exhausted, American deliveries began to play a huge role in supplying the army. American canned stew, which soldiers ironically nicknamed the Second Front, along with SPAM, egg powder, and fats, became an integral part of the ration. Red Army soldiers didn't always like these products for their unfamiliar taste, but it was these supplies that helped the Army endure the toughest years of the war. A philosophy of survival. Unlike the American system, the Soviet one did not spoil soldiers with variety, chocolate, or cigarettes, though crude, tobacco, makorka, was included. Unlike the German system, it did not resort to using substitutes or humiliate soldiers with hunger. This was a system created for the most brutal, total war in human history. It did not promise comfort, it promised life. It gave the soldier exactly enough energy to march dozens of kilometers through mud and snow, to lie for hours in a frozen trench, and then to rise for an attack and plant the flag over the Reichstag. And as history has shown, this harsh pragmatism proved to be no less effective a weapon than American abundance. For the German soldier, the word captivity was always synonymous with terror. Goebbels' propaganda painted blood-curdling pictures of torture, starvation, and humiliation. Captivity on the Eastern Front was especially feared, but capture by the Western Allies promised nothing good either. And then, the moment of truth. Hans, a 19-year-old grenadier from a division crushed in the Ardennes, stands with his hands up before an American soldier. He is hungry, exhausted, and terrified. He expects the worst, but instead of the butt of a rifle or a kick, the American, a young man just like him, just wearily waves his submachine gun toward the rear. The first shock comes at the collection point for prisoners of war. Instead of confiscating their last crumbs, the Americans delouse them, provide medical care to the wounded, and feed them. Each German prisoner is issued the very same ration he had only seen before as a bizarre trophy, a can of meat, biscuits, and a packet of coffee. Hans stares at the can in his hands. He can't believe it. It seems like some kind of cruel joke. He's waiting for the catch. But hunger is stronger than fear. With trembling hands, he opens the can and takes the first spoonful. And in that moment, his world collapses. The taste of real rich stew, a taste he had forgotten after long months on an ersatz diet, has the effect of an exploding bomb in his mind. From there, things only got better. The prisoners are transported to rear area camps in France or Belgium, and many are even sent to the United States itself. And here, they are truly introduced to paradise. Baikobishtas, a food, 3 hot meals a day, white bread, real butter, meat and vegetables, no rutabaga soup or sawdust in the bread. The calorie count of a prisoner's ration in an American camp was often higher than that of a Wehrmacht soldier on the front lines. Conditions: clean barracks and medical care. Prisoners who agreed to work, for example on farms, were paid a small wage they could spend at the camp store on cigarettes, candy, or toiletries. Treatment: with the exception of isolated incidents, the Americans treated prisoners correctly, adhering to the Geneva Convention. They were not humiliated or beaten. A poll conducted in the U.S. in 1943 showed that 74% of Americans blamed the German government for the war, not the ordinary German people, and this attitude was projected onto the prisoners. For many German soldiers, especially those captured late in the war, American captivity was not a punishment, but a salvation. They went from the frozen, hungry hell of the front to an orderly, well-fed, and safe world. Many of them would later remember the years spent in camps in Alabama or Texas as the miracle years, die Wunderjahre. They learned English, received an education, worked on farms, and for the first time in their lives, saw how a democratic, wealthy country lived. This experience produced irreversible changes in their minds. The entire Nazi ideology of Aryan racial superiority, of the strength of spirit, of contempt for the material world, all of it crumbled to dust at the sight of a shelf full of canned goods in the camp store. They realized they weren't just fighting another army, they were fighting another way of life, and that way of life defeated them not only on the battlefield, but in their own minds. The war was over. Millions of soldiers returned home, but the world they returned to would never be the same, and the humble tin can of the soldier's ration played a significant role in these changes. Its legacy proved to be far more lasting and extensive than its creators could ever have imagined. First, there was a revolution in the food industry. The war served as a gigantic testing ground for new technologies in canning and packaging. Instant coffee, dry soups, canned meats, and powdered drinks, all developed for the army, flooded the civilian market after the war. They forever changed the daily lives of millions, making food more accessible, convenient, and long-lasting. The era of convenience foods and fast food, which would define the second half of the 20th century, was born in the laboratories of the U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps. Second, the standardization of nutrition. The concept of the individual ration pack, first widely used by the Americans, became the gold standard for all armies worldwide. Modern combat rations, whether they are American MRES, meal, ready-to-eat, Russian IRPS, or French RCIRS, ration de combat individuelle réchauffable, are all direct descendants of the C and K rations. The idea that every soldier should carry a completely self-contained, balanced, and high-calorie supply of food for a day became an axiom of military science. Third, humanitarian aid. Millions of unused soldiers' rations left over after the war were not thrown away. They became the first and most powerful tool of humanitarian aid for a devastated and starving Europe. Former enemies, Germans, Italians, as well as allies, received boxes of American stew and chocolate. For an entire generation of Europeans, the taste of American canned goods became the taste of salvation and hope. Thus, the tin can was transformed from a weapon of psychological warfare into an instrument of soft power, shaping a positive image of America for decades to come. Finally, there was the cultural footprint. The American ration became as much a symbol of the GI as the Willys Jeep or the Thompson submachine gun. It became firmly embedded in popular culture, in films, books, and memoirs. It became a metaphor for American power, practicality, and the ability to solve any problem with industrial-scale might. And so, The simple tin can, designed to feed soldiers in trenches, made a journey around the world. It fed an army, humiliated an enemy, saved millions of civilians from starvation, and forever changed the way we eat. It is a story that shows how sometimes the most significant revolutions don't happen on the battlefield, but at the dinner table, and they begin with the quiet click of a can opener. Thank you for watching to the end. If you liked it, please give it a like, subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell so you don't miss new videos. There are more amazing stories to come. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones.